Hybels himself, he stepped down in the spring, but he still denies everything.
As far as we know, we haven't really heard much from Bill Hybels since he stepped down, I believe the New York Times got a statement from him denying the most severe allegation, but that's the most recent we've heard from him. He has not offered comment or circled back to do anything. I should say when he stepped down, he did offer apologies for perhaps not listening and for reacting as defensively as he did when the allegations first surfaced, but that was the last that we've heard.
Hybels founded this church. Like, can they survive without him? And or after this latest revelation, are thousands of worshipers going to start leaving the church? Or Willow Creek Church specifically? You
know, that remains to be seen. There's a lot of faith in that ministry. It is a powerful ministry. Willow Creek does a lot of wonderful things for the community and around the globe. And the members realize that, and that's what makes this so sad, is this leader that has led them down this wonderful path and transformed thousands of lives might have had this dark side to him that they didn't know about, and they trusted him, and he let them down as far as they know. And so I think that it really remains to be seen. There's a lot of optimism about the interim pastor who has stepped in to guide them. There's a council being drawn together of outside Christian leaders to help them navigate this tumultuous time, and I think there's a lot of optimism there. But, you know, typically when people are unhappy with their church, they withhold their tithes, their contributions from the collection plate. Maybe they stop going, and maybe they start church shopping. So it really remains to be seen what road the Willow members will take.
Okay. Manya Brashear-Pashman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to another episode of Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be talking further about the Willow Creek Bill Hybels situation. I haven't talked about this for about 6 months now. There has been about a 6-month lull in what has been happening over at Willow Creek, the megachurch near Chicago. If you don't remember, there was a big scandal last year in 2018. Pastor Bill Hybels had to step down or retire early, and then consequently, the entire elders board stepped down, and then also the entire leadership team, the newly appointed senior pastor and the top teaching pastor stepped down. So big personnel changes over at Willow Creek have happened in the last 6 months or so. And we still haven't heard from Bill Hybels himself after all of these different allegations came out, and after the leadership team retired and the elders board retired or stepped down. We haven't heard anything of Hybels. Now, one of the things that I have been saying constantly is that Bill Hybels needs to communicate. He needs to step up, and he needs to explain where he is and what he's doing to prove that he's innocent. Now, why does he need to prove his innocence? Because he has said on many occasions that these allegations are false and that there is no sexual misconduct, there's no inappropriate conduct on his part, and he has continually denied that there is anything that he is guilty of other than maybe just getting a bad temper and reacting negatively after all of these accusations. So he is still maintaining his innocence, yet we haven't heard from him. We don't know where he is, or we don't know what he's doing. Is he coming up with some kind of defense that he is going to then explain to people in an interview, or is he going to take some kind of legal action, or what is he doing? Because we haven't heard from him for at least 6 months. There have been no press releases. There has been no communication on his part to say, you know, hey, I am in the process of recording and writing down all of the pertinent information, and I'm going to release a statement that basically underscores my innocence, and here's why, and I'm going to prove why the charges against me are false, the accusations are bogus, and I'm going to vindicate myself, but it's going to take time, and I want to do a thorough job, and that's what I've been doing. I've been uncovering evidence and calling witnesses and all kinds of things. He hasn't said that. He doesn't communicate that at all. In fact, no one knows what Bill Hybels is actually doing. Now, does Bill Hybels actually owe anyone an explanation? He has been basically removed from the church that he founded some 40-some years ago. He has been basically discredited, and he has fallen as a church leader. I just read the other day, people are taking his endorsements off their books. They have had Bill Hybels appear in some promotional videos, and they are scrubbing those videos and deleting those sections where Bill Hybels has contributed. If you go into a Christian bookstore, you may not be able to find any of his books on the shelves. If you go into a used bookstore or a Christian or a library, you're going to find that the only place you can find his books are basically in the for sale library book sale or used bookstores or places like these. He is not selling. His books are not selling. Publishing companies have pulled him from their catalogs. I mean, this man is being essentially erased out of the picture of evangelicalism, much like in the Soviet Union, political leaders who fall out of favor with the Communist Party are erased from the pictures, photoshopped out. Well, Bill Hybels is being essentially photoshopped out of evangelicalism, even though he has been one of the top 10 most influential leaders in evangelicalism for the last quarter of a century. And I think that you could even make a case that he has been, beside Billy Graham, he has been the most influential Christian leader in the half a century of Christian evangelicalism because of his influence with his church. His church and Bill Hybels go together. He founded this church. He began to do innovative ideas, came up with the seeker-sensitive or seeker-driven concept, has influenced thousands and thousands and thousands of pastors and local churches all over the country and even all over the world, especially in Europe. And so this man is a huge, huge leader in evangelicalism. And everyone for the last quarter century, everyone wanted to be associated with him. Pretty much everyone in evangelicalism. They wanted his endorsement on their projects. They wanted his endorsement on their books. Most of the larger church pastors, whenever they've written books, they would seek out an endorsement by Bill Hybels because he was the seeker church guru. And thousands and hundreds of thousands of pastors over the last quarter century have gone to his Willow Creek conferences and learned leadership tips and techniques from Bill Hybels. And so he has touched almost every single church in this country in one way or another over the last 25, 30, 40 years. So I think he owes the people that he has influenced an explanation as to what is happening. Now, the question that people want to know is Bill Hybels guilty of these charges? Is he guilty? Did he do all of, some of, or none of these things that he's being accused of? Now, my rundown of the list, there are about 10 different women or so at last count that have accused him of some form of inappropriate behavior. Now, they're all not of the same type. Some are almost bordering on laughable and silly and trivial to serious, disqualifyingly serious. For example, the last one that appeared in the New York Times over the summer was that he had actually had a sexual relationship with an assistant some 30 years ago. Now, if that's true, that would be a disqualifying sin disqualifying behavior, and he would then have to step down from being a pastor, because that kind of behavior is totally inappropriate and cannot be tolerated in the pulpits of our churches. We have to have men who are honest and sincere and are holy enough to at least be faithful to their marriage vows and to not go into this kind of adulterous behavior. And so if he's guilty of that charge, if that charge alone he is guilty of, then he disqualifies himself, and he needs to come forward, and he needs to confess that sin, and he needs to be the leader that he has been teaching other pastors to be over the last 30, 40 years. He needs to step forward and own his own sin, take responsibility for it, and role model what you do if you are someone who has failed morally. You need to role model that. So, and that's what people want to know. Is he guilty of this last and most damaging accusation? Now, if he is not guilty of that damaging accusation, the last one I would say would be the most damaging. Now, these other little minor things, I think people in the Christian world, and even outside of the Christian world, people outside of the Christian world would look at some of these other trivial accusations of misdeeds, and they would almost laugh at them. They're so trivial and petty. And I think people in the church would give him grace if he is guilty of any one of those little petty misdeeds. Then I think people in the church, for example, inappropriate hugging, they hug someone after church. Pastors do that sometimes. They shake hands in the line when people leave the church, and then other times someone gives him a hug or whatever like that. And there was one of the accusations what he gave an inappropriate hug to a woman, and I think that's the kind of accusation that people would say, okay, yes, I could see that happening, and he needs to be careful, he needs to be cautious and look at what the perception is when he's in situations and whatnot. But I don't think that would be something that would actually remove him from his position as pastor at Willow Creek. So there are most of these, the vast majorities, perhaps 90% of these accusations are of a minor type that could be worked out, and if he is guilty of saying something inappropriate or of making a lewd comment or something like that, that could be dealt with within the church community and the evangelical world, and he could apologize and said, that was a stupid thing for me to say, I shouldn't have said it, and it won't happen again, I've learned from my mistakes, and so on, and the church would move on, and evangelicalism would move on, and there would be a lesson to be learned from that. But this last accusation, the one that his office assistant claimed that 30 years ago that he and her participated in a sexual relationship, one-time sexual relationship. And if that is the case, then that is a damaging accusation, and he needs to come forward and say, no, this didn't happen, and I will defend myself against these lies and false charges. And he needs to put up a defense, and he needs to let people know that he is participating in building a defense, because people look to him and people have been influenced him, and he doesn't want to have this thing just linger there. Now, he has gone on record in interviews, especially I believe it was the Chicago Tribune interviewed him and asked about this latest and most damaging accusation, and he flat out denied it. He said, this is false, this is a false accusation, do not believe it, it is a lie, and he denied it outright. So he either is telling a big fat lie, and he is trying to cover his tracks from 30 years ago, and that is a possibility, because even though he is a pastor, and even though he's taught about leadership integrity and so on and so forth, if you're cornered and you are humiliated and you think that everything is going to fall apart unless you tell a big fat lie, he might be actually giving into that temptation and telling a big, huge lie. And I hope that's not the case. Excuse me, because that is the kind of behavior that is a bad role model for other leaders in the Christian world, as well as also all Christians. You don't lie when you are under pressure. Those are the times where you have to steel your resolve. You have to depend on God, the Holy Spirit, fall on the providence of God, and this tell the truth and be honest and be open and upfront and say, this is what happened, and so on and so forth. If he's actually guilty, he needs to own up to that. But he hasn't in any way confessed to this latest and most damaging accusation that appeared in the New York Times. So where we are right now is he has still gone on record as denying this most damaging accusation. Now, Willow Creek, the church, now is trying to move on from the Bill Hybels episode. The elders that were there in 2018 are gone. The leadership team that was there in 2018 is gone. New elder board, new leadership team. They're looking for a senior pastor, but there is an interim pastor who is holding down the fort. And there is a third-party independent investigation into the charges against Bill Hybels. And that's been ongoing for a number of months now, and they're supposed to be giving a report in early 2019. So here we are, it's early 2019. We don't know exactly when this report will be done. But we do know the people that are on that committee, 4 people, evangelicals, and a couple of them are closely affiliated with Wheaton College and fairly reputable people. And they are conducting an investigation independent of the church. That was the big criticism before, is that the church and church people and church elders and church leaders were involved in this investigation, and they were somehow being manipulated by Hybels or pressured or intimidated by him to show a favorable verdict on these charges. So there's a third-party independent investigation, and that report is due out at any time now. Now, here's the problem, and I noticed this earlier in the summer. There is almost the assumption right now that Bill Hybels is guilty, and that the assumption of innocence is no longer there. So, in other words, Bill Hybels now, if he wants to prove his innocence, he has to prove his innocence rather than the accusers prove their truthfulness. So you have these women coming forward, and the last one, the most damaging, and she makes an accusation, but as far as I know, there hasn't been any cross-examination, there hasn't been any testing of that claim, and there hasn't been any testing of her credibility, there hasn't been any kind of probing and digging deeper. It's just simply her story is being repeated as if it's a fact. And Bill Hybels now is not innocent until proven guilty. He is guilty until proven innocent. So he is now given the burden of proof to show that he's not guilty. And that's the way the church seems to be operating. And in fact, that's the way a lot of the people, for example, in this third-party independent group seem to be assuming also. And that's unfortunate, because how are you going to conduct an investigation unless you give the person accused the innocent presumption of innocence? That is a basic bedrock core assumption of our judicial system, our legal system. You go into a court case with the presumption of innocence, and it's the burden of proof for the people accusing someone of something to prove their point, not the person who's being accused to prove that he's innocent. But that's been changed around in the Willow Creek story, and that's unfortunately that is due to the influence of the Me Too movement that basically takes at face value every accusation as true. And that's what the Me Too movement and the radical feminist movement and now the radical left is pushing the narrative. You have to believe the women. You have to believe their stories. If you question their story, you're questioning their integrity. You're not taking them seriously, which is totally false. Again, presumption of innocence is given to the accused. And whether it's in this situation or another situation, you have to give the presumption of innocence to the accused. So Bill Hybels should be given the presumption of innocence unless the charges against him can be proven, and the charges that are made against him, the people who are making them have shown to be credible, and that what they're saying seems to corroborate with other evidence from other areas. But that's not taking place in this case, unfortunately. As an example of this, Wheaton College, my old alma mater, recently in December held a conference on sexual abuse in the church. And one of the speakers at this conference at Wheaton College was one of the accusers of Bill Hybels. And she was allowed to get up there and tell her story at a conference on sexual abuse in the church and addressing this problem and so on and so forth, which I feel is totally inappropriate while this investigation is ongoing. If you have an investigation against Bill Hybels, a pastor of Willow Creek, and Willow Creek is just right up the street from Wheaton College, within an hour's drive, or within half an hour's drive. And then you have a conference taking place at Wheaton College, which has strong ties to Willow Creek because many of the students go up there, many of the professors go back and forth between Willow Creek and Wheaton College and some of the other seminaries in the area. So there's a lot of interaction. Publishing companies are connected between Willow Creek and Wheaton College and so on and so forth. There's a lot of interaction going between the two, the church and the college. So you have, during this ongoing investigation, you have one of the accusers actually attending a workshop conference on sexual abuse at Wheaton College. So the assumption there, at least in the organizers and the people that are there, is that this accuser is telling the truth. Because why would you give the accuser the platform at a conference on church sexual abuse if you didn't believe her? So the assumption is this woman is telling the absolute truth, but the investigation is supposed to be into whether she is telling the truth and whether there's credible evidence for that. So there's all this confusion. You have parts of evangelicalism who are simply wanting to jump on the Me Too bandwagon. They want a virtue signal. They want to say, see, I'm with it on this. We're not behind the times. I don't want to be left behind. This is the trend. This is the fashion of the day. So we're all on board. Believe the women. Don't even question them. Don't at all ask for their verification of their claims. Believe them automatically. Don't believe the men who they're accusing. The men are cover-ups. They're telling lies. The women are telling the truth. They always give the accurate information. So we'll always believe the women. And that's the Me Too movement assumption. And that, unfortunately, is the assumption of a lot of the people involved in this Willow Creek situation now. So you have a big jumbled up mess. But one of the things that Bill Hybels needs to do in the midst of this mess is, if he is innocent, he needs to restate that and say, I don't want to distract from the investigation and I don't want to hurt the church, but I want to say for myself and other people who I've influenced over the last quarter of a century that I am innocent of this most egregious charge, and I am going to lay out the evidence. I am going to defend myself, and I want to let people know that this is not true, and to pray for me and pray that I can come up with the evidence and present my case in an appropriate way so that people can see that this is not true. Okay, he needs to come out and say that. Now, why wouldn't he come out and explain the situation? Why would he be silenced for 6 months or so? Why would he totally have a media blackout? We've not heard one peep from him for the last 6 months, and he is the subject of the investigation, and his character and his reputation and his legacy is on the line. Why wouldn't he speak up? Well, one of the ways that he might be thinking right now is that he wants his church, the church, Willow Creek, and he wants the ministry that he built up for the last 40 years, he wants that to continue to grow. And he wants that to prosper, and he wants that to be a force for good. And he doesn't want to do anything that would jeopardize that. So if he starts speaking up and he starts defending himself in the newspapers and on television and interviews and so on and so forth, it might be something that could cause problems in the ongoing ministry of Willow Creek Church. Whenever you have division, that might turn people off. They might want to leave the church when they see that Hybels is saying one thing, and then the church and the leaders that resigned and the elders that resigned and people in the church are saying another thing, and then other evangelicals are saying one thing. Maybe Hybels says, I want to just not say anything. I want to be silent, and I want to not cause any more stirring of the waters so that people can settle down, and people, Christians who look to Willow Creek and to evangelicalism as a whole for guidance and leadership, can simply settle down and not get caught up in this thunderstorm of events. So that could be a reason why he does that. But I understand that logic, and that could be the reason why he's silent, but still he needs to give people a word of encouragement to say, the only thing I will say about this is that I am not guilty of this latest and most egregious charge, and I will be laying out the evidence for my innocence at a future time. But right now, I want to let things calm down, and we want to focus on getting everything back to order. We want to get Willow Creek Church, let it get back on its feet, let the World Global Leadership Conference that he was a part of get back on its feet, let evangelicalism sort of settle down and bring peace back, and then at a future time he will lay out a case, maybe in a book. Maybe he's writing a book explaining everything in detail, his story. He may confess to some of those little petty things, misbehaviors, whatnot, the ones that really would not necessarily disqualify him. And then he wants to address the big one in a chapter of the book or whole chapters of the book, and explain why this didn't happen as the accuser is saying and what really happened. So, but then at a later time, present that after things have died down. That would help, but we really do need to hear from him. We need to hear him say something, break his silence, and let people know he's still alive and that he still maintains his innocence. But the next thing we should see is this report coming out by Willow Creek, the third-party investigation. And when that comes out, I will go through it and we'll talk about it at another time. So God bless. We'll see you back on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.